Welcome to episode 50 of the POG Show, the Port Orange Government Podcast. I am your host, Mike Springer, the Public Information Officer for the City of Port Orange. And today we are going to be talking a little bit about stormwater and the city's stormwater master plan. And with me here in studio, we have our Director of Engineering, Juno Reed. Juno, welcome.
Thanks for having me in, Mike.
Appreciate it. And, you know, this has been something you've been working on with your team for a while now, kind of developing the stormwater master plan and the projects that are going to be tied to that. For people who may be new to stormwater and understanding the process behind it, can you kind of give us a layman's breakdown of what it takes to come up and do these stormwater projects? These aren't things, obviously, that are going to happen overnight, but there's a lot of planning that goes into these projects before we can actually start turning dirt and getting them done. What's basically the process that you and your team have to go to when you try to figure out what is the best approach for stormwater and handling those projects?
Man, that's a big question. So I'll do my best to try to answer for you. So, I mean, really, it starts with identifying the areas that may need, and we're going to be talking primarily flood mitigation in existing areas, because there's all kinds of other things that go into designing new areas for stormwater. But we're going to talk specifically about, you know, existing areas, older parts of town that don't have adequate infrastructure.
And you're concentrating on those areas. Why?
We're concentrating on those areas because that's the areas that we're seeing the vast majority of our flooding in the city.
So when you're looking at those areas and trying to figure out what projects may or may not work there, are you running these through computer simulations? What are you kind of doing to try to figure out what's the best way to tackle some of those issues? Because I'm sure every area is unique, even though they may have some of the same underlying vulnerabilities.
Right. So the key part is to figure out, first of all, what is happening, like what's the area that's flooding, and then trying to determine what's contributing to the flooding, what surrounding area, what water body is contributing to that flooding. And we do it, you know, multiple ways. So a lot of it is firsthand knowledge of either city stormwater staff or residents in the area. And then we also do, as you mentioned, some computer simulation through stormwater modeling, which is basically constructing your city drainage infrastructure and topography and land uses and all the things that make up your city into a computer model. And then we, through the models that we use, we're able to put rain into those computer simulations and see what it looks like in the computer simulation. And then the goal is always to try to make our computer simulation emulate close as we can to what we see actually in the field. And then that gives us a tool, because if we have the model can accurately predict what happens in its existing condition, then we can start plugging in potential solutions into that model, into that computer simulation, and seeing how effective our solutions are. So that's one of the key things for us is using that data from the models to help us come up with solutions that are going to work.
Was there anything from the data that you gleaned that was kind of like an aha moment for you, or something that you learned in terms of how flooding occurs in the city or ways we can mitigate it efficiently?
I think we had a pretty good idea of where the water was coming from. One of the things that, as we went through the process, that we found, because we always try to, when we're coming up with these solutions, we always try to come up with the most cost-effective solution to prevent the most amount of flooding. But what we found in a lot of situations is that your traditional gravity system, ponds and pipes, were not effective in the models with reducing flooding to the level that we wanted to reduce flooding. So that led us to a more, what we call a mechanical solution or a pumping solution. And that was probably one of the biggest things we got out of it, is we had to end up going to the mechanical and the pumping solutions for a lot of these areas.
So are those basically your two options when it comes to moving stormwater? It's either you allow gravity to move it from the highest to the lowest point to some kind of outlet, or you're going to have to use some kind of pump or mechanism to move it physically.
Right. You either are going to store the water, impound and store that water for a certain amount of time.
So like the ponds we have or something along those lines.
And then potentially slowly release it after the storm, or you're going to have to pump it before, during, and after the storm in certain situations where you don't have topography of our area plays a big role. We're very, very flat, especially on the east side of the city. And also one of the bigger contributing factors is our tidal effects on all of our canals. So when you have the tide pushing in and the rain falling down, with a traditional gravity solution, you don't always have anywhere for that water to go.
And you've been looking at these different areas, running these simulations for how many months now have you been working on that?
So really the idea for the master plan, believe it or not, we started talking about it before Hurricane Ian. We started talking about we need a master plan. And granted, when we were talking about it, and that sense, we weren't talking massive flood mitigation projects. But then when Hurricane Ian hit, we're like, yes, we definitely need a master plan, and we definitely need to focus on flood mitigation on the east side of the city. And so it's really been since mid-2022 when we really started the process, kind of talking about it, and we executed the project after Hurricane Ian.
So it's not a quick process, because I'm sure there are so many different hoops you have to jump through, boxes you have to check. You can't just come in there and put some data into a computer and have a plan spit out.
That's correct. And believe it or not, building these computer simulations, building these models is a lot of physical work, because you have to take all the existing drainage infrastructure that's in the city. Some of it was built in the 60s or 50s, and we didn't always keep very accurate records of exactly what we built. So sometimes, especially for critical connections, like connections underneath interstates or major outfalls, we physically had to go into the field, and physically measure and see exactly what infrastructure we had. So it was a lot of, and building that computer model is just very, very, very time intensive.
Yeah, it sounds like a very time consuming and even arduous process at times, just trying to collect all that data, making sure it's accurate, because if any of those numbers are off, or if you're not inputting the right information there, that's going to change the models drastically.
It does, and that typically shows up when you start running your existing condition simulations. And either it won't flood in an area that floods, or it'll flood areas that don't flood. And that's when we got to take a couple steps back and see what we did when we were building the model that is because it's only going to do what we're telling it to do. So, and we had a couple of instances like that where we know that that's not the case. We went back and confirmed some culverts or some pipes or some connections that we didn't have in the model initially.
So you go through it, you put the data in, you develop the stormwater master plan, and then from there you start to identify kind of key projects that you think could have some kind of effectiveness when it comes to flood mitigation. What are some of the projects that the city is working on right now or looking at working on? So
we had and so our master plan was formally complete in the middle of June. So we have a final report. We identified so we started off with areas of interest. And we identified 9 specific projects that could do some level of flood mitigation in those 9 areas. We don't have money to construct all those, so we had to prioritize. And we prioritized the projects that had the most amount of flood reduction for residential homes. And the projects that we are currently actively working on in one form or another are first is the Pepper Hill Sugar Forest area improvement project. That in essence is we're going to build a pond to store water, and then again build a big pumping station that will pump that water east. It's about an 8,000 feet route that we have to take to get that water east all the way to the Halifax River.
Why was that the plan for the models? What were you seeing when you were kind of running the data through there and put in that project? What was it showing you that the impact potentially could be?
Because our level of survey isn't very accurate, we're looking at flood reduction. We're not talking about flood elimination for this many properties, but flood reduction for anywhere between 300 to 500 properties for that project. And a lot of that depends on how well we're able to get the water from the neighborhoods to our pond. That's going to be one of our bigger challenges is routing the water from where it's currently flooding to our pond so we can then pump it out.
And that's a project, too, you just recently received state funding for as well, or will be getting allocations from the state.
Correct. And we are already under design for the project. So we kicked off design in May of 2025 and then put in for a legislative appropriations grant up in Tallahassee. And we just recently received word that we were approved for a $3 million grant on that project from the state.
And these are pretty expensive projects.
Right. So the Madeline Pepper Hill project, it's actually got a couple of phases that we're looking at. So right now we're focusing on the initial phase, which is kind of the Sugar Forest proper area and the pond and the pump station. And we're looking at a little over $17 million is our initial estimate for that project.
And what are some of the funding sources you're looking at? I know you trapped into some state ones, but what are some other ones that you and your team are working at trying to get in?
So the Volusia County received some funding through the CDBG program, the CDBG-DR, which is called Disaster Relief. And that's a federal money that the county received. And they developed what they call the Transform 386 program, which is designed to help individual homeowners and also help governments with flood mitigation projects. So we've made submittals to the Transform 386 program for funding. There's also another avenue of state funding through the Resilient Florida program. One of the keys to that Resilient Florida program is you have to complete a comprehensive vulnerability assessment first before you're eligible to apply for that funding. So we're kind of right near the end of that vulnerability assessment, and we're trying to get that done so we can apply in this current budget cycle or in this current grant cycle for some funding through the Resilient Florida as well.
It just sounds like your team's trying to find funding wherever it can. And I'm sure with all those funding resources, as you kind of mentioned with Resiliency Florida, there's going to be all those qualifications that are attached to it, all those things you're going to have to do in order to receive that funding, whether it's the vulnerability assessment plan you talked about or other things. So there's a lot of work that goes into this.
And really one of the things that really bodes well for us is we have a complete stormwater model that shows that we have projects that are going to be effective. And that goes a really long way, because we're not saying, hey, we think this is going to work, or based on our gut, this is going to work. We're saying, no, based on this science, based on this model, this project's going to work.
Because you're able to run it through and say, if we get this much rain in this amount of time, what is going to happen to that area if we put in these improvements?
Right. For instance, part of the process for the Transform 386 grant application, as we had to quantify every single property that we feel is going to have some sort of flood reduction, we developed a spreadsheet with a couple of hundred properties on the spreadsheet, and we had to show what the flooding was before the proposed project and what the flooding levels were after the proposed project. So that was a lot. That was a lot of legwork. And fortunately, we had our consultant that helped us do the master plan, helped us do some of that analysis as well.
And when you're talking about flood reduction, are we saying that, without this system in place, you would see X number of feet of flood water, and versus with the system, it's now reduced to this much? Or what does that mean when you're talking about flood reduction exactly?
That's basically it. So it's some of the homes, if you had to say the flood was a foot in the house and we reduced it by more than a foot. So in that specific house, we eliminated the flood with the project. But then there's other areas where maybe you had 2.5 feet of water that was in the house, and with the project, we got it down to 5 or 6 inches. It's not great, but 5 or 6 inches is much better than 2.5 feet. But these projects, you're going to have a really, really difficult time eliminating flooding in all instances.
Right. So it's more of a flood reduction than an elimination, where
Correct.
You're saying that even though you had X number of feet of flooding in the prior storm, we would reduce it to this amount now. So you're reducing the amount of potential flood water that would get into a home, not necessarily eliminating it.
And a lot of that has to do with what type of rain event we are predicting or we're working towards. So we, like for the 10-year and the 25-year storm event, which is smaller storm events, we in essence can eliminate flooding for some of those smaller storm events. But when you get into the 100-year or the greater, which Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Milton were both greater than that 100-year flood, then you have a really hard time completely eliminating flooding.
And when you're saying 100-year, 500-year event, we're not saying that 1 in 100 years will have the storm. It's 1 in 100 chance of having that event occur.
Right. So it's a probability. I guess the engineering or the flooding associations or we've decided through time that it's easier for people to understand 100-year flood than 1% flood, because the 100-year is in essence every single year there's a 1% chance that flood or that amount of rain will happen.
And what are we looking at timeline for the Pepper Hill project? When do you think we might get things start rolling there?
As I said, we're under design. We've got some of the preliminary design started. We're out there doing physical surveying on the ground. So we expect that design process to be, a 12 to 14 month design process. So about this time next year, we should be close to completing design. And then a lot of when it's going to go to construction is going to depend on what those funding sources are.
And you mentioned there was about 9 different projects you were looking at. What are some of the other ones you think are getting a little bit closer, or you're working on getting funding for at the moment outside of that Pepper Hill one?
So one of the other big projects that we see a lot of potential benefit for is our Sleepy Hollow flood mitigation project, which is again a stormwater pumping station. We also have a Portona area stormwater improvement project that is actually, we were able to determine that a more traditional pond gravity solution will work in that area. So
different than the mechanical ones we're seeing in Sleepy Hollow.
Correct.
And Pepper Hill.
Yeah, that's more of a traditional. We've identified some vacant pieces of property that are large enough that can give us adequate ponds to give us enough storage to store those floodwaters. We're also working on a project. So at the same time, we're working towards a major wastewater plant improvement project. And one of the issues our wastewater plant is having is it floods. because it's located near the intersection of Dunlawton and Spruce Creek, which is a notorious area that floods in the city. So one of the things that we're going to work on with that project is we're also going to try to do a flood mitigation project that's aimed at preventing flooding at the wastewater plant. But if we don't flood at the wastewater plant, we're going to reduce flooding in the surrounding area by a tremendous amount.
What are some of the things you're looking at doing with that one? Is it like those Tiger dams we've seen? Is
we're actually looking at a stormwater pumping station located at the wastewater plant that would tie into our discharge force main from the Madeline and Pepper Hill project. So we're kind of tying these projects together in a lot of ways because you get a economy of scales that way sometimes.
So are a lot of these projects going to be interconnected from what we're seeing, or are they going to be mostly standalones?
So they're going to be standalone projects, but they will have some interconnectivity. Whereas if we're pulling, like for the Madeline Pepper Hill project, for instance, that water eventually does on its own flow through ponds and ditches and gets out to the Halifax River. But it's got to go through neighborhoods and everything else to get there. So we're going to basically, in essence, cut that water off from having to get out through the traditional net areas. So those downstream areas from there are going to see some benefits because they're not going to have to manage that water coming from that area. So because we're going to be pumping it. So it's not directly connected, but there will be some benefits outside the project limits.
And the timeline for all these projects is probably going to be tied closely to funding and those funding sources.
Really, for these, because these stormwater projects, as I said, are very expensive. Most of them are at least $15 to $20 million per project. So finding those funding sources and securing that money to construct these projects is going to be critical. So that's going to dictate the timeline on these projects.
Okay.
And so I just wanted to go back and
sure.
I think there's a little bit. So when you talk about Transform 386, it's not a traditional grant. We asked for $7 million on the Madeline Pepper Hill project through Transform 386. What that does, if we get funded through Transform 386, then the county then takes the project over and actually completes the construction of the projects and then hands the finished product over to the city. With them contributing $7 million, we would contribute our $3 million that we got from a state appropriation grant, and we would contribute money from our own stormwater utility. And then if we get Resilient Florida, we contribute that money. And so the county would then construct those projects. So the timelines a little bit come out of our control when the county takes over, but we have really good working relationships with the folks at the county. They do a really good job. They're just as committed as we are to get these projects moving and going quickly. So we're actually really excited to work with the county if we are fortunate enough to get funding through Transform 386.
Now, with the county taking over a project like that, does that free up your team then to work on a different project kind of simultaneously, or is there also benefits to that too?
Yeah, so there's definitely benefits because the county being a bigger government, they have more resources that they can dedicate to these projects, and it will free up some of our time to handle some of the, I don't want to call them smaller projects, but some of the smaller scale projects, because we have identified a couple of smaller scale projects, throughout the city that's going to help, it'll help 3 or 4 homes here and there, and we can focus on those and put our resources to that with the county taking the heavier load on those other big projects.
Anything else you think is important to get out there to let people know about these stormwater projects as we kind of move forward with that master plan and implementing some of the projects?
I just think it's kind of the same message that we know the importance of flood reduction in the city. We care just as much about reducing flooding as the people that are getting flooded wanted to get done. So we are fully committed to doing it, and we are working. I mean, it's all stormwater all the time at this point for us. So we have put a lot of effort and a lot of time and energy into try to help the residents by reducing the flooding.
And there's a whole section now on the website that people can go to if they want to learn about these projects, learn about stormwater in the city, how it's managed, how it's maintained, right there at the city's stormwater information page on the website homepage there, just at www.port-orange.org. Just click on that stormwater tab there on the homepage, and you can see those projects you're talking about here today and all the information you want to know about stormwater.
And that's a really good point, because we're also kind of in the background as kind of a final piece to the master plan, as our consultant is helping us make those stormwater pages a little bit easier for the residents to navigate and a little bit easier for the residents to understand. Because when engineers do it, we think that they understand the way that we understand, but we're having some people that are experts in web design and web content to help us put out a clearer message on those projects.
And those will be updated and changed as things progress and go throughout this process.
Correct. As we get a funding source, or as we reach a milestone, or as we receive a permit, we'll go onto the website and put periodic updates.
All right. Well, Gino, we appreciate the update from you. Hopefully we'll have you back on here when things are moving even further along. And thank you for coming in. And Nick, take us on out.
Thank you, Mike.